welcome to the Improvisors podcast. I'm Neil Thomas, and this is my co-host, Kevin James.
Thank you, Neil. On this podcast series, we chat to improvisers about their histories, their practices, their conceptualizations, their aspirations, and their inspirations. Who have we got on today, Neil?
Today it gives us great pleasure to be in conversation with DEBRA Batton. She talks with us about her athletic origins, her acrobatic enlightenment up north, and being bitten by the bug in a time of burnout.
Also about the release of the raging monster within, posthumanist balcony dancing, and a plea to play.
We hope you enjoy this episode of the Improvisers podcast as much as we have.
Yes, let's go.
Good morning, DEBRA Batton. It's such a thrill to have you on the Improvisers podcast. Welcome. Welcome.
Thank you. It is such a pleasure to be here. I'm enjoying these podcasts very much.
Great. I'd like to ask, when did performance start for you? Spin out the story.
Oh, look, we haven't got long enough. I grew up in a very sporty family, had no artistic influence in my sort of family life, but I was a gymnast. And at a certain point, I decided to go back to school because I'd left school, do my year 12, and I was mentored by a gymnastics coach friend of mine who was also the person who said I should go back to school, that I was smarter than I thought I was. And it was a very helpful moment in my life. And I will mentor you through. So thank you, Roger. Anyway, I went to Rusden to do physical education because that's what a sporty girl would do, right? And I discovered the contemporary dance course there. And I met people who were doing that course, and I just kind of went, I want to do that. That's where I belong. I belong here. And I started sneaking into classes until one day the teacher pulled me aside and said, "Excuse me, what are you doing here?" No, she didn't say that. She said, "Excuse me, who are you? You're not on my roll." And I explained that I was really interested. And she said, "Well, you can change your preferences, and you can change into this course." Unfortunately, because I'd been shy, I'd left that a bit late. Anyway, long story short, I did a double degree in physical education and dance at Rusden. And that changed my world and my life. And, I knew so quickly that my body wanted to be creative in this way. And it was very easy to sort of transition into a sort of creative artist as opposed to a sporty person, I guess. That was the very beginning. And from there, I shall go on, but you can interrupt at any time if it's too long. From there, I joined a little dance company called Storm in a Teacup Dance Theatre. That was being run at the time by Tracy Mitchell, David McMicken, Helen Skye, and John McCormack. And, we were just a bunch of people who got together, and we found spaces. We found space at the Y that was in St Kilda Road there, the old YMCA. And we would work together dancing, and we would choreograph with each other, and we would improvise, and we would create shows once a year and try to get funding and put them on and put them in a fringe festival or some other, opportunity that came along. So that was my roots, really. That's the earliest days. And then from there, I've really followed opportunities, and mostly opportunities have been often something I've kind of thought, oh, I'm not ready for that. I can't do that. But I'm going to say yes. And I think that was partly out of naivety. Having not grown up in the arts, I didn't know what I didn't know. And perhaps that was a really good thing, because even though I'd think, I don't know if I can do that, I didn't have the baggage of, well, you should have done this and you should have done this and you should have done the other. So I guess that was helpful. And then I did some work in Darwin with what's now called trapeze dance. And that was a really important moment for me because while I was with trapeze dance, I did some work in Indigenous communities. And I had this really awful kind of moment where I was being asked to teach dance in a community. And I was like, I can't teach dance to Indigenous people who are dancing all their lives. Like, are artists the new missionaries? Like, I had this complete sort of panic and, moment of really questioning, what am I doing here? And so then I sort of turned my work with them into more improvisational. And so many of the Indigenous kids were doing acrobatics. That was, where their joy was. And then they would be completely off their minds when I would join them for acrobatics. And, I could still do backflips and all that sort of thing at that time. And so that was sort of the beginning of integrating my gymnastics with dance, where prior to that, I had tried not to let the gymnast be seen because I was very aware that in dance, we don't do spectacle. And I was very aware of that and and I wanted so much to belong in the dance community that I was really sort of trying to remove the gymnast from my body. So this turning point, working in Indigenous communities, then kind of exploded a whole lot of other opportunities for me, including working in the circus and working with Legs on the Wall in physical theatre. And I sort of journeyed those things basically as opportunities came my way. I think that's enough of my history because there's too many details.
Deborah, I'm just going to summarize your history just a little further. And from what you've had written in your bio, I'm just going to list these words: Deborah Batton, performer, director, artistic director, teacher, producer, physical theatre practitioner, Circus Oz, improvised performance, such and such with Catherine Magill, Legs on the Wall, and on it goes, as well as you've been travelling the world of recent-ish and travelling the country of recent-ish. It seems like one never-ending feat for you. So that's not a question. It's a confirmation and sort of painting the broader picture of your artistic practice and life. Improvisation, you mentioned it before, and we'd love to delve a little bit further into, I guess, the broader world of your performing, but wondering where improvisation sits either now or how you would see it through historically permeating what you've done, what it means to you now, and wonder if you're willing to take that wander together.
I'd love to. It's interesting because I gave up a lot of performing in order to focus on being an artistic director and learning my directorial skills. And while I was an artistic director and running a company, towards the end of that time, I was really burning out without recognizing it. And I saw a flyer for Tony Osborne's Friday afternoon 3-hour classes. And I thought, I'm just going to do this just because I just need to be fed. I feel like I'm putting out so much that I need to be fed. And I went to those classes and they absolutely did that. They started to nourish me again as a creative artist because I felt like as an artistic director, you become a strategist. And strategy is a far cry from creativity. I mean, it's involved, sure. But it really helped me survive my last few years as a director because I was getting these Fridays to nourish. Now, I had no intention at that time of becoming an improvised performer necessarily. You know, it was nourishing. But I met Catherine Magill in those classes, and we started to look for opportunities to perform, to practice together and to perform together. And then I was at the point where it was time, you know, I really did burn out basically, and it was time for me to just move on from artistic director of a small to medium company. And so I resigned, and I resigned because I just needed to move back into finding my real creative self. And the improvisation classes with Tony absolutely nourished that, and my heart was full, and it helped me while I was still working because I was getting fed while I was giving out, and it's so important. So yeah, that was the sort of beginnings, and sometimes he did performances, improvised performances, and I really got bitten by the bug, if you like. And then I had to move back to Melbourne. My mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, and my partner had moved to Melbourne for a job because we needed someone to be working. And then I moved back to Melbourne, and I joined Al's classes, Al Wonder. He was working on Fridays as well, and I met this gorgeous group of people in his Fridays class. And I started, you know, that was sort of also my way of coming back into Melbourne and starting to find a creative community because I was still quite fragile at that time. Well, I was fragile and I was angry because I broke up with my partner, and, you know, and I'd been going through menopause, and I was a raging monster. And in some ways I miss that rage because it really used to bring out some good impros. I'm more chill now, but I think in lots of ways improvisation was a cathartic place for me to explore this inner world that was really sort of struggling with who I was and what I was, and using in improvisation, I'm sort of bodily involved, emotionally involved, and it's this beautiful line between therapy and performance. And it sort of saved me in lots of ways. And then Catherine Magill came to Melbourne too, and so then we formed Such and Such, and we began looking for opportunities to do sort of long form improvisations as a duo. And we did several shows that we put on in all sorts of different places. And, you know, that was just a fantastic, you know, a highlight of that was doing the comedy festival at Dance House, where we were on a double bill with a company from, gosh, I can't remember where they're from. They were from Europe. And, you know, we just had some wonderful opportunities and did some great performances of sort of like 45-minute shows of duetting together. And throughout all of that, I also was reconnecting with my sort of circus community in Melbourne, and I needed, and I started working for Circus Oz as a touring show director, which meant that I was leaving Melbourne a lot, and so my practice with Catherine got a lot more interrupted. And then my sort of circus journey has taken off in unexpected ways. And that has sort of disrupted our partnership. We're still great friends. I still look for opportunities to perform with her. But, you know, we haven't got the sort of ongoing practice together that we used to have. And now I really miss my improvisation. I don't get enough of it, although most of the shows that I perform in have opportunities for me to play. And that's something I cherish, and I cherish my confidence to play because of my improvisation practice.
I was reading up on you and noted that you've done an MA in the realm of public art. I was thinking about well, I just like, I'd be interested if you don't have to talk about your MA, but if I feel like there's a really good fit, you and public art. There's something, and Circus Oz is, even though it's maybe in a big top or inside, there's something of public art about it, in that it's breaking some conventions. It's outside of the big boats of culture.
Yeah.
Would you mind talking a little bit about public art?
Yeah, I'd love to. Yes, I'd love to. The masters happened for me because of lockdowns in Melbourne. I'd often thought about doing a master's, and I didn't want to do it in sort of performance so much. Partly because I sort of feel like I could teach that course. And one of the things I loved about doing public art was it's part of a fine arts course. And so the emphasis is coming from a slightly different position. And I learned so much about the fine arts that I didn't know, and that was fabulous. But yeah, like because we were in lockdown, I was doing improvisations on my balcony and filming them as part of my my practical work, and I was dancing with the elements. So I would be very much paying attention to the sky and the trees and the birds and the sounds of the city around me, and this also kind of led me towards post-humanist philosophy, and particularly the work of Rosie Braidotti. And what I loved about her is she's really kind of making lots of connections between different categories, and sort of stopping, not prepared to sort of go, well, these are the blocks and things only fit in the blocks. And so I was then doing my balcony dances, and then I was making a show with my little circus company, A Good Catch Circus, where I was using my knowledge from post-humanism in that. And then I was also arguing that the theatre actually is a public space. That's the whole point of a theatre, is for the public to come. And so I was kind of arguing that public space doesn't have to be outdoors, that public space is also a theatre. And in some ways, when people choose to come to a theatre, they're choosing to come to the public space of the theatre rather than have performance thrust upon them unexpectedly. And that there's something that's very important about that you have the choice to engage or not engage. So that was I was having a lovely time in that. And yeah, for me, it's all about the public. It's all about performing with an audience, that they are so important in it. And I still really like the idea of performing out in public space as well. And when I was in Legs on the Wall, we did performances on buildings. The public space has been part of my history. Over the years, I've performed in outdoor environments very often. And so it was great to sort of go into this academically, and I do love academia. I love the thinking. I love finding out new things. I'd never heard of post-humanism before I was in the course, and now I'm an absolute convert. I'm a post-humanist. I will say it quite openly. I'm a post-humanist. That's where my philosophy belongs now. And for me, post-humanism is essentially the next step from humanism as a philosophy. So the understanding that humanism essentially puts the human at the top of the food chain as the superior being to all other species, and that the human, in speaking philosophically, is white European male, and everyone else is other to that. And so post-humanism is not so much about not being human as about kind of going, there's a new framework to think about humanism in post-humanism, and that is all beings are equal, whether we're man, woman, trans, black, white, you know, like that we are all included in post-humanism, and that we must collaborate with all species in the world. And so it's got a very strong sort of feminist, environmentalist sense to it. And there are many other forms of post-humanism, like transhumanism, which is more interested in the sort of future of what the human could become. There's, you know, sort of post-humanism that's more about the sort of cyber world. You know, there's many strands of post-humanism, but mine particularly follows the sort of work of Rosie Braidotti.
Deborah, I wanted to just bring a couple of really short quotes to you. They're by a philosopher, activist, Bayo Akomolafe, and they're to do with play. And they're really short. The first one is, we want to invite play as activism, as philosophy. That's the first one. And the second one is, play is decolonizing. It refuses to center the subject. A chair is a spaceship. Adultism is the pathologization of play. You mentioned play earlier, and it seems to me that your work has always been inherently playful, even around the most important and serious of matters. I'd love you to talk a little about play and improvisation, because I think they're really close. To improvise, I think, is to be able to be available to play with what is there and to be played with by what is there. I'm wondering if you could talk around those areas and bring it to life for you and for us.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I think that play is so important, but it's a small word. It's only 4 letters, and it's a huge topic of what play is and what differentiates creative play from other play. And I mean, I think all play is probably creative, actually. And, you know, I love that idea that play gives us permission to explore and discover. And that's what children do from such a young age. And, you know, we are trained out of it. We're trained to know in advance what we're going to do. A grant application does this to us, even in the arts, you know, like. And one of the things I love was Catherine and I did a show once called Every Resolution is Temporary, which actually comes from, I've got it here, a man called George Lipsitch in an essay, Listening to the Lamb. And I borrowed that from him because I loved the title so much, because that is what happens with play. You're not necessarily looking for an end moment. It's just an evolving construction of, oh, I've discovered this, but now what if I do that? And now it's become this. And so it's got this endless possibility to it. And that's what improvisation offers us. It offers us this possibility of playing in the moment and discovering really strange connections between things. And I think for me, I often feel when I'm improvising that there's this simultaneous director, performer, maker, audience member, all happening at the same time. There is part of me that's constructing, you know, and that comes from a long performance history. There is construction going on. But the construction is to keep things going, not to be in and of itself the thing. And within that construction, there's this wanting to just be lost in the spontaneity of what gets produced by whatever I have constructed in any moment. And it's that spontaneity then suddenly I find, yes, I can be in the darkest place and have a comical twist to it, because I haven't tried to be dark and I haven't tried to be funny, but somehow that's the sum of the parts of that moment of construction. And then there's a recognition, oh, this is happening, and a desire to, oh, I'm going to stay here. Everybody is very, very worried. Or, okay, oh, this is developing. Oh, it's developing. It's going even darker. Oh, we're going even darker. Oh, and you know, you're sort of lost in this developing of an idea. Or you're kind of going, huh, I just saw something over there. I've dropped that, and now I'm leaving everyone hanging, and I'm going to just completely change direction. And this is the sort of the wonderful thing about improvising, is that you're breathing into every moment, and every moment you don't know what's going to happen next, even though you might be aware that, oh, I'm developing something here, or I'm staying with something here. You can sort of recognize that you're doing it, but you're not consciously thinking about doing it. And I think that's all part of the practice. You develop the skills of knowing these possibilities, and then you don't have to think about them when you're out there performing and playing with the audience, playing with their responses. You know, that, oh, sometimes it's the audience's response that makes me stay with something. And it might be because I can feel how uncomfortable they are. And I'll think, well, I think we need to stay here longer. How uncomfortable can I make you? And other times it'll sort of be, well, the audience, I can feel that I'm not fully in this, and there's a distraction. Great, that's going to take me out and into a new direction, and we'll see what happens now. So it's all very playful. It's always playful. No, yes, and I agree, Kevin, even if it's dark, it's got a playfulness to it. And I think when I watch improvisers and I watch them making decisions in these moments about staying with their material, abandoning the material, developing the material, and you can kind of see in their bodies these questions and these decisions, and yet they're continuing on with what it is that they're doing. I find it thrilling, absolutely thrilling to watch. And I guess that's part of what I hope audiences find when I'm performing as well.
I was I was going to ask, you mentioned earlier you were bitten by the bug of improvisation with Tony. I was going to ask you to unpack that a little bit. I don't need to now, because it's
yes, I've gone there.
so clearly immersed. I think about the gap between let's call it structured performance and improvised performance, and often they feel like two completely different worlds. And I'd like them to come closer together, or you know, to mix, or and I, you know, imagine Circus Oz and the acrobatics, legs on the wall, hanging off buildings. There's not a lot of room for individual expression and personal improvisation in these life-threatening situations. So it's really a real example of something that's really tightly choreographed. How do you see the two worlds sitting together, coming together, not coming together?
Yeah, look, I agree with you. I think I do kind of feel that they're separated. And you know, with the current group that I work with, the small group, A Good Catch, the three of us have a very strongly constructed show that has lots of space for improvisation within it. And the two women that I perform with have become more improvisational through being on stage with me and watching my freedom to take a moment in the construction, because of something from the audience, because of something that's gone wrong, and I just bring it to the fore and own it and play with it and take it out there. And I have been delighted to see them become more comfortable with taking a moment themselves, you know, and it's just, it's happened. We've now been performing together for sort of over 5 years. So over that time, that's happened. And that's been wonderful because they come very traditionally from circus and it was not a skill in their repertoire. But it's sort of by osmosis, they've kind of collected that skill. And I think in lots of constructed performances, the people with some improvisation have that confidence to respond to a moment honestly when something happens. And I guess although circus is very constructed, it also loves the clown. And so the clown is perhaps the bridge for me, particularly in circus and improvisation. It's the clown that comes out with an audience, regardless of the constructed nature of the work. And I see a strong connection between clown and improvisation. And I feel like my clown has been developed through performance as improvisation and has got more and more layered through that practice. And I love her ability to surprise me, even in those constructed performances. I think another thing I'd like to say about that is that when such and such did some of our long form pieces, we would often give them a title, something that we're exploring at the time. Like we did a few that always started with she knows too much, she's stepped too far, you know, this sort of thing. And we would often have people who didn't know that we were improvising. And we often struggled with, do we tell people we're improvising so that they're in those moments with us or not? And we did have people that even though we told them, they didn't quite believe us. They would still think, oh yeah, but you decided on the beginning and the middle and the end and you're improvising in between, or, you know, these sorts of things. And no, we do open improv. We do not go out with a score. We have discussions after we've worked together about what we think our current weaknesses are. And we might highlight them to each other so that next time we perform together, we're trying to tackle that weakness a bit more. And, you know, so that we're constantly evolving and growing in our work. And but we don't go out with scores. And so I find that a really interesting thing. And some would go, well, I wish I knew you were improvising. It's even better now, you know. But we did struggle because there's also a lot of public that kind of don't want improvisation. You know, they want to know that the artist has worked hard over a long time to construct a product that they're going to come to and judge whether it's good or bad. And that's difficult to do, I think, with improvised performance, because you're really judging a process and a happening that's right there in front of you and that you're very much a part of.
And Deborah, maybe that's one of the reasons why many improvisational communities are sort of a world unto themselves. Those that do improvisation appreciate it and vice versa.
Yes.
But where I want to go with that, we've chatted to many people from many domains of improvisation, and how to sort of language it, how to actually talk about improvisational processes, and use the word process a minute ago. I think it's something to do with being available in the moment, being responsive, noticing to what's happening and being responsive to it, somehow forming a piece around that or being formed by it. So I guess it's a whole process of being available to emergent material and working with it on the go and finding where it might go. What else would you add to that, I wonder, when it comes to sort of the process of improvising for you?
Yeah, I think that there's something about the embodied nature of improvisation, that you're there as a body on stage, And whether you dance or you stand still or you're very pedestrian or very flamboyant in your movement, there's still something about this embodied human taking to the stage, taking to a space, taking a certain amount of time. And, you know, Doreen Massey said, time is the dimension of change and space is the dimension of coexisting difference. And I think that's lovely, because I feel like when the improviser takes the stage, they are differentiated from the audience. And in that moment, they're coexisting with the audience, but there is a differentiation. We're not saying all is equal here, like you're there to watch me, and that's sort of clear, but I want to coexist with you. And if you're performing not solo, but with an ensemble or a duo, then there's also this coexisting difference with another person where you have to constantly respond to something you're not expecting. And you can't just sort of drive on regardless with your own improvisation. You have to really respectfully coexist whilst constructing something. So, and this something is changing over time, whatever the time allowance is that you have. And I think that that's a sort of beautiful thing to hold together, because in the world, we need better people to coexist. You know, we need higher levels of sharing space and coexisting with our differences. And I think improvisation helps you to learn that. It's a wonderful skill for that, for life, you know. But yes, it is interesting how we bring people in to be interested, to watch, and I mean, one of the things I love about the Australian scene in improvised performance is that people without any training in you know, creative performance are part of that world. And for me, they fill me with excitement, because they bring something fresh without that sort of historical sense of what the rules are of performance. And they constantly remind me of this sort of entrapment of the rules that can happen, and that without them, even more things can emerge, you know, and that's just such a delight.
I want to bring it to the present. Perhaps, I'm not sure how we're going for time, but I was just reflecting upon you, and I wrote down a few words, and I feel like you're a mentor to many in obvious ways and also in not obvious ways. Just your presence as who you are is mentoring a whole lot of, you're like a shining star. I feel like you're a wise woman, a dynamo. I'm not sure I'm allowed to say wise woman in a post-humanist kind of way, but
yeah, you are.
They've got two W's: wise woman, a dynamo, a warrior, and incredibly humble. So to the present, what are we up to?
Oh, yeah.
If you were in charge of the world.
If I was in charge of the world.
Yeah.
Gosh, that's a hard one. Look, the present for me is I'm enjoying being an older woman on stages, whether it be circus, improvisation, theatre. And I'm enjoying being able to be bold in that. I'm trying to rise to the occasion in terms of, as an elder, I need to speak up more often when I see injustice. And starting, you know, a bit slow perhaps, but sort of starting to realise that I have a responsibility with that. Part of that is also, like, I've always been someone who, when I discover something that I think is great, I want everyone to know about it. You know, I'm sure they'll all love it too. and so that's part of why I often have relationships with a broader group of people, because I'm sort of, come in, you should try this, you'll like it, come and try this, it might change your life like it changed my life. I like to share. I'm very much someone who believes that in sharing knowledge far and wide. I don't take on the scarcity idea. I think it's abundance. There is an abundance of possibilities in the world, and we have to be really careful to be ensconced in the sort of scarcity specialist models of, you know, neoliberalism, advanced capitalism, whatever you want to call it, that's, you know, thinks that we only do things if there's some kind of profit involved. That's the thing I want to challenge the most in the world. I think that, you know, community, creativity, these things, they don't need to sit in that model of what does it produce, what does it, what profits involved, and, you know, I think the scarcity that this sort of economic model has produced is a real killer for creativity and for people engaging in creativity, even though it makes them feel so good when they do, and they get so much out of it. So I think, you know, we've got to sort of change this idea somehow, that everything is about profit, and an economic structure is the only structure to live in. It's like, it's just bullshit, and we have to call it out, and we have to keep demanding that there, you know, that's not the only way with which we measure our lives.
Debra Batton, thank you so much for chatting with us today. We're reaching a time, well, this is close to the end of the podcast. I want to pick up on your word, sharing. We want to share this podcast with as many people that can be exposed to your liveliness, your sort of wisdoms and invitations. So thank you, Debra, so much for taking the time, for chatting with us today. And I will finish on this note, unless Neil wants to add anything more. I just want to confirm the words of summation that he used before. So thanks, Debra.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me. It's been really fun. Thank you.
Thanks, Debra. And cut. Wow, fantastic. Oh, love it. Thank you. Thanks, Debra. Brilliant. Just brilliant.